Hi guys, it's Collin. Today we're going to make the pumpkin hot pad. So here's my example that I made. So this is the 9 by 9 and it comes down to a little bit smaller than 9 by 9 once you turn it and everything. But we're going to make the 7 by 7 today for an example, and I'm going to have two that I'm going to give to my neighbor as a hosting gift. So it's a great last minute gift. It doesn't use a lot of fabric. It's quick to make. So here we go. So here's my hoop. Okay, I have poly mesh hooped in here. That's what I usually use for hot pads. This is a 10 by 10 mighty hoop. Your hoop might look different. I embroider on a multi-needle machine, so my hoops are a little bit different, but the steps will be the same for you. So for our fabric, we need Embroidery. This is the Collin version. That's what I use. A couple of different companies make it. You can use whichever one you like. This is not microwave safe. Please don't put that in the microwave. You need cotton batting. 1 or 2 layers is okay. I've looked a lot of different places and the manufacturer says you can use 1 or 2 layers. I'm going to use 1 today because I don't want my hot pad to be like an inch thick, but you can use 2. So, and then we have our main fabric. We have our back fabric, and these are all pre-cut and pre-pressed. And then I have my pieces for my pumpkin. So these have, let's see, what is it? Heat and Bond Light that I already ironed on all of here. I haven't taken the paper off yet, but I will as we go. So those are the things that you're going to need. Here's my bias tab. You can either use the bias tab file that comes with your pumpkin hot pad, or you can cut a strip. Mine is 2.5 by 5. That's what I typically cut. I feel like it gives me enough space. You can do whatever works for you. You can also use bias tape. So, and I've got a lot of dust everywhere today, but excuse me. So again, we're going to be making this one right here. The first step we're going to do is we are going to stitch our placement line. So I'm going to go and do that, and then I'll come right back. Okay, so we're back with the placement stitch here. And I used black so that you could see it, but you can use white or whatever color you already had in your machine. You won't see this on your final product. This is going to show us where we want to place our fabric. So if we're making a hot pad, which I am, you want to use some sort of insulating material here. So I use the stuff by Collin. I bought a whole bolt of it last year, maybe 2 years ago, honestly, and it's lasted me, forever. So then on top of that, you're going to place your batting. So for me and my hot pad, when I'm going to turn it right side out, I use 1 layer of Embroidery and 1 layer of batting. You can use 2 layers of batting, which is what I do when I'm making a hot pad that I'm not going to turn right side out, right? If I'm going to put a binding on it. And that gives you a little bit more loft in the final design here. This is with 1 layer, so you can see there's a little bit of loft, but it's not super puffy. The 2 layers of batting will give you more loft, but it's a little harder to turn right side out, especially if you're making a smaller sized hot pad. So for that, we're going to go, and then we're going to do the next stitch is going to tack down our batting, and we'll be right back. So we have our batting and our Embroidery tacked down now. And so what I like to do is I like to cut these out of the seam allowance. Now this is an optional step and not everyone does it, and that's okay. I feel like they turn right side out a little bit better when I do, so I'm just going to keep on doing it. Now you want to be careful here that you don't cut your stabilizer. I actually did that when I made this sample, and I was able to recover it by taping a little bit on the bottom, but that can be a really big problem, especially if you do it late in the process. So be careful that you're not cutting into your stabilizer. So we're just going to keep cutting here. And I use black again for this placement line, so you'd be able to see it in the video, but this is, again, you won't see this one in your final product, so it's okay to use whatever color that you have in there. I try and get pretty close to the line, as close as possible without it taking forever. You could really spend forever doing this, but I don't. So just give it a rough cut here. All right, we're almost done. And right after this, then we're going to place our top fabric, which you will see. Okay, so we have all of our excess cut out of the seam allowance here. The next step is to place our top fabric. This is a beautiful off-white linen. It's just going to be like a nice classic light color here. Then the next step is going to stitch this top fabric down. So I'm going to go ahead and run that. And then the step after that, we'll stitch the first placement line for our pumpkin, which is actually the vine up top here. So when I come back, you'll see this stitch down and then the first placement line for our applique. All right, so now we have our top fabric is stitched down, and then we have our first placement for applique. So I use black for these two too, just so they'd really pop in the video. This is when, personally, I will switch to using the right color. So right now I'm going to peel my backing off my first piece of applique here, and I this nice kind of sage green right here. So I want to make sure it's fully over this. All right, and then the next step is going to be that it's going to tack down our applique here. So I'm going to do that, and then again, I did switch to a nice green color here, and you shouldn't really see it because there will be a satin stitch that covers it, but I always switch to the main color just in case. All right, so now that we've got this stitch down, and you can see the stitching color blends in a little bit nicer than the black. So, and this part is really hard for me. I gotta say, I'm not very good at cutting out applique. I don't know if maybe I just need a little bit more practice, or maybe I just get in my head too much. But um, I try and get as close to the stitching as possible. You can tug on it a little bit as you're pulling it, and then I rotate my item around. I rotate my item. I don't rotate my arms. maybe that's what I'm doing wrong. I'm not sure. But either way, just cut as close as you can to the stitching without cutting the stitching, of course. And be careful that you're not cutting into your pretty main fabric either, but we're just about there. And the satin stitching will cover a few little errors that you make, so that helps. And the fusible interfacing really helps with this too, because you can get a much cleaner line and you don't get those like little tiny, I call them thread hairs. I don't know what they're actually called, but it helps with that. So here we go. We're just about done. There we go. All right, so our next step is going to start stitching the pumpkin. So this one stitches in kind of an interesting way that's different from some of the others. So we'll do the placement for this one, and then the placement for this one, and then the placement for this one, and then this one, and then this one here. Okay, so our first thing we're going to stitch down is right here. So I will come back and show you that in just a sec. All right, so now we have our first piece of the pumpkin here. So I have here's the back side with my fusible on it, and that just kind of keeps it nice and stable. I'm going to place that right over here, and I try and keep a straight grain here just so that we're not running into any warping problems. You might not need to do that. I just always do. So straight grain, cut it a little bit wide so you have enough. The more excess you have around, I feel like the easier it is to cut off. So I tend to cut my pieces a little bit larger for applique. So we're going to tack this one down. We'll trim it, and we'll talk about the rest in just a sec. All right, so let's trim this piece real quick here. And then remember, our satin stitch will finish off the edges really nice. So I tug up a little bit and then try and get as close to the seam as you possibly can without cutting your lower fabric, which I have totally done before. And it's very sad. So here we go. So for this nice linen on top, I really like it. It's a little bit lighter. I'll sometimes use drop cloths. It's actually kind of my favorite material to use for a hot pad. It definitely gives it more of an industrial feel. It's a lot thicker. It's not as like soft as these, but if I'm setting a hot pan on something, I want it to be thicker. So that's okay. So here's an example of the drop cloth. So I showed you a little bit earlier, but it gives it, I don't know, it's got a lot of weight to it, but I like it. So, and they're cheap. You can buy them on Amazon. It's kind of my little budget hack for the video here. Okay, so here we go. So we have this, and then it's going to do this one, right? And then this one, and then this one, and then the middle. So I'm going to go ahead and run those just so this video isn't like 7 years long. And we'll come back when all the applique is put down, and then we'll talk about the rest. Okay, so I put down all my fabric, and I cut it out to the best of my ability. And I think it looks really cute. It's going to look really nice with this. I reversed the colors so that they would kind of go together but be a little bit different. So the next thing it's going to do is run the quilting across the entire thing here. So I'm going to go with a neutral color similar to this one so it blends in a little bit. You could use this opportunity to really bring in some contrast or to be a little bit more subtle, whatever look you're going for. So I'll run that stitch and then we'll come back. Okay, our quilting is done and it looks so cute. I'm really excited. I love how Jen made the squares a little bit smaller on the smaller sizes so that it scales down really well. So this is kind of where I take one last opportunity to see if I have any big threads caught in here or if I've got a chunk that just stands out a little bit more. This one looks pretty good. It's never perfect, but it looks pretty good. So I think the satin stitch is going to cover almost all of that. I'm going to be really happy with it. So next step is going to be the satin stitch. It's going to go around here in the green, and then it's going to do all around the orange, or excuse me, all around the pumpkin here. I'm going to use an orange personally. So I'm going to run those 2 steps next, and then we'll come back to talk about the tab. Okay, so we finished our satin stitch here. So we did the stem and then the pumpkin and then this cute little curly Q right here. So it looks great. I'm really excited. I use polyester thread for my hot pads. You know, people worry about it melting, and polyester does melt, it's true, but it melts about 435 degrees Fahrenheit. So I don't know about you, but I don't handle any pots or cooking or anything that's hotter than that. So depending on how you cook, you know, maybe you would need to go to cotton. But for me in my kitchen, 435-degree melting point is perfect. I love polyester thread. I love that that little shine gives it a nice little contrast from the flat fabric. So that's just me. You can use whatever works for you. So our next step here is going to be the placement for the tab here. So you can see on my example that we have this cute little tab. So I made my own bias tape here. It's a double fold. So that's just what I'm used to making from quilting. You can use anything here. Sometimes I use elastic. Sometimes I use like an old zipper. You know, if you have half of a zipper, you just kind of fold it in half. That can be really cute. You have to be more careful with the zipper and melting, but you can use whatever you want. So this was 4.5 by 2.5. Actually, it might have been 5. Yeah, 4.5. So here we go. You can sew it down if you want. My sewing machine is buried right now, if we're being honest, so I'm not going to do that. But it would be nice if you did, if you sewed down here. So the first thing is it's going to stitch our placement line here. So I'll do that real quick, and then we'll talk about how to put it on. Okay, I don't know if you can see it. Oh, you can. Yeah. So there is the orange stitching right here. I used a color so you'd be able to see it. So that's going to show our placement line for our thing. So there's a lot of different ways that you can place your loop here. Excuse me. So I will sometimes fold it over like this. I'll sometimes put it like this. You know, so what you want to remember is you want to have the loop going down. So you want to always place it like this. And then how exactly you style it is up to you. So we can kind of get an idea here. If we do that, right, it's going to look like that when we turn it right side out. Or if we do this, which is what I did on my other one, it's going to be, they're going to be kind of crossed over there in the front. So, you know, you can decide whichever one looks good to you. I'll actually do it a little bit differently on this one so that we can compare and see both. So what I do is I get a piece of tape. I use masking tape. You can use whatever tape you want. So I put this here and then I kind of play with it a little bit just to make sure I like it. So this is a smaller hot pad. So I don't know that I really want my loop to be quite as long as I did on my other one, right? So I think it looks a little bit better, shorter. I like that. Okay. You can measure it. You could get all fancy. I'm not really a fancy person, so I don't do that. I just wing it, see what happens. And I don't think that's enough tape. So I'm going to put down one more layer of tape here. Now, I don't use masking tape in my seam line unless I absolutely have to. That's the thing about the cheaper tape is you don't really want to sew through it. It's going to gunk up your needles, excuse me. You don't want that. So anyway, we're going to do here, and then it's going to tack it down next. So it's going to start in the center and then tack on both sides here, and that keeps your fabric from shifting, which is really nice. I love that Jen did that. So we'll be right back. Right, so we attached our loop here. I'm going to go ahead and take this tape off just because it's a little easier to cut out later if I don't have a bunch of tape right there. So I'm going to take that off, throw that away, right? Okay, so the last step is our back. So this uses what's called an envelope back, where you have one side, we fold the edges down, and then I sometimes will finish the edges on both sides. I didn't do that today, just so we can talk about how you would do it when you only do one, right? So you want your fabric to be right side down. So I don't want this fold showing. I want to see this side here. So I'm going to make sure that I put this down first, right? So first is your finished edge, and make sure you have at least a 1/4 inch. I like to keep about a 1/2 inch. It's not a science, just do your best, but at least a 1/4 inch. And then this on top, you will lay over here. So you can tape this down if you feel like you need to. Sometimes this will be springy here, and depending on your foot height, sometimes what I'll do is I'll tape that down. So my machine kind of just like brutalizes everything that you put underneath it. So I wouldn't need to tape that down, but it can definitely help if you're using a single needle, or if you're not familiar with how to adjust your foot height, or if you just want to minimize your risk of ruining your project. Taping that down is a good thing to do. So again, I'm going to make sure my folded edge is first, right side down. I'm going to make sure I have a 1/2 inch seam allowance. at least a 1/4 inch. I try and get to a 1/2 inch, right? So it looks like we're good here. We're going to tack it down all the way. It's going to finish our project, and we'll come back and we'll cut it out. All right, so I took it out of the hoop. So those magnetic hoops are scary and they make a loud sound. So I just went ahead and did that before we started the video. But what I like to do is I cut out round things with pinking shears. I don't know, my grandma taught me that when I was really little, and that's just kind of how I've always done it. These are like $10 on Amazon. If you don't have a pair, they're really helpful for cutting out rounded shapes. So it's a little harder to cut through the tab there, but just do your best. And so I leave about a 1/4 inch. This is maybe a scant 1/4 inch. And that's okay. So Jen reinforces the stitching here. So your fabric's not going to pull out unless you're really tugging on it. But I still like to leave about a 1/4 inch. So you just kind of keep going here. And sometimes if you use a thicker stabilizer or you use multiple layers of batting, this is going to be a little bit harder. So, all right. So we've done that. And then we're going to turn it right side out. So let's see here. I love this part. It's my favorite. All right, so I taped my hoop, my loop down. So I'm going to pull that up. All right, and so now we will. All right, so there we go. So see how our finished edge here will kind of go over this. So I need to iron it, of course, first. So let's see. Let me grab my iron. We'll just do it right now. All right. So here we go. It looks really good so far. I like my tab. I think my loop is the right size. It's maybe a little bit bigger than it needed to be, but that's okay. It'll look cute. So, and I kind of roll it over here as I iron it. And again, because polyester has that melt point of 435 degrees Fahrenheit, you can go ahead and iron right over it. You can't over felt or, vinyl and stuff like that, but polyester thread is good to go. So let's see here. We're almost done. So to close the hole on the back, you can either hand sew it. You can use a fabric glue. You can use a seam tape that we use for the bags. You can do any number of things. I like to tuck in those little threads here. And then since this is a gift, I'm going to hand sew it. When I'm making something for me, I don't even usually sew it at all, to be honest. But since I'm going to give this to my neighbor who's hosting a brunch in a couple days, I'm going to sew it by hand. But you can use a seam tape or anything like that, or just leave it unfinished like I usually do. So here we go. So here's our pumpkin hot pad, and they look really cute. I'm really excited. Thanks so much for joining me. Can't wait to see what you make.